Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things that you can buy that will actually help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This reason is why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, and along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times are to hunt. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters and stands at the nexus of machine learning and whitetail deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've had an opportunity to use the desktop version last year and have been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store and download it today. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 268. Today, we're taking a trip back in time yet again with a 2021 look back, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope the winter storm that kind of passed through the Midwest and things of that nature left you dry, maybe not completely snowed or iced in, and hopefully you got lucky and just got some rain. I'm hoping, or at least the rain will do me some good, get rid of some of the snow that's around me. Hopefully doesn't put a damper on my scouting plans like the snow did last year. So fingers crossed, I'm hoping get rid of this snow and I can start headed out here in the next week or two, because I am getting a severe case of cabin fever and am ready to jump in the travel trailer and do a little exploring. But we're not going to drag this up front out or belabor this up front. I guess that's become my catchphrase now to a degree, one of the stupid words that I use way too often. But we are not going to belabor this up front. We're going to just kind of get into things today. Two things I wanted to pass on to you guys before we jumped into today's podcast. Number one is, if you are headed to the Great American Outdoor Show here during this week, or the second week of the show, or the second weekend of the show, be sure to head over to the Tethered booth. That's booth 1033 and the Exodus booth 927, and give my buddies there a shout. Tell them that I sent you there. I was there this past weekend, got to hang out, see a lot of you folks that were at the show. So that's awesome. I always kind of dig being able to spend some time at the booths at the show and get to meet people, regardless of whether you listen to the podcast or not. I meet people that don't, and it's always just cool to kind of hang out with a bunch of hunters for a weekend and talk shop. It's kind of an outdoor show, yes, but it's also kind of doubles as maybe the world's largest hunting camp, might be one way to kind of explain what the Great American Outdoor Show is. So be sure to stop at those booths and check those guys out. Also, if you're in the running for a trail camera or wanting to up your ante for trail cameras this year, I wanted to give you a quick heads up that our buddies at Exodus, as you guys know, have been killing it in the outdoor space. They make, in my opinion, the best trail cameras that are out there, and they back it with the best customer service in the industry. Over the last 7 years, they've consistently just shown that they've built quality trail cameras that just flat out work. And they, of course, have that best warranty period that exists in the industry. Every single camera is backed by a 5-year warranty, and it comes with a theft and damage coverage. Yep, you heard that right. Literally half a decade. You'll be covered by the Exodus 5-year warranty, but more than likely you won't need to use it because their cameras are already built to last. However, in honor of trade show season, knowing that not everybody is always able to get out to these shows, they gave me the heads up that they're providing a great buying opportunity for everyone who listens to this podcast to pick up their Exodus Render, which is their 4G LTE cell camera that sends pictures and videos to any device that you might use, a mobile device, through the Scout Scout Tech app. You can save 15% by being one of the first 100 customers to use the code SHOWTIME. That's SHOWTIME. Use that promo code at checkout and get yourself some savings. This code will save you $50 on an Exodus render and almost $75 off the security bundle. These types of savings with these guys don't come around often, so I encourage you guys to check it out the deal if you're in the market for a reliable trail camera. Once again, the code is SHOWTIME to save 15% off any render purchase. Like I said before, these guys don't do a ton of sales. They do a handful of them throughout the year. So if you are in the market for a trail camera, I wouldn't overlook the opportunity to save a little bit of cash and get yourself a trail camera with a kick-ass warranty. So head over to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and take advantage of the sale pronto. So with that, man, we're going to just jump into today's podcast. If you've listened to, I guess it was episode 266, maybe, I did a 2021 kind of year in review. I used to do, and I think I'm going to probably bring this back. Greg and I have talked about bringing this back, doing the look back series. It's always kind of fun to do a handful of those throughout the year where Greg, actually goes through the catalog of almost, 268 podcasts and picks out the moments that he liked, and wants to kind of explore topics further. So what I started kind of doing is I don't go back and listen or re-listen to my own podcast. It just seems kind of weird to do that. Unless there's something that was stated by a guest that I wanted to re-listen to because I was learning something and I forgot maybe what they said, then I'll go back and kind of listen. However, I realized that I have this whole repository of information, and it's kind of silly that I have it all at my fingertips and I don't ever go back and kind of revisit some of these things. And maybe I don't go back all the way into the archives. Maybe I just go back a year and kind of pick my favorite moments from the past year, from specific guests from the past year, to kind of revisit some of those. Some of them are very strategic, and hunting strategy related. And some of them are just kind of cool stories that I thought were really interesting, really cool, or really impactful. And I thought it'd be cool kind of for me to do, to kind of go back and kind of revisit some of these things that I don't often get a chance to do. So that's what we're doing today. This is part number 2. There'll probably be one more part of this, one more 2021 look back. It'll be part 3. It'll come out in, who knows, a couple weeks, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. But you can expect one more of these year in review podcasts. So with that, today's session, the guys that we're going to have on this episode is Nathan Killen, who, Virginia. A lot of you guys probably know of him. Big time mountain buck hunter, slayer, just a straight killer. One of my favorite podcasts from this year was with Eddie Claypool, and we have some clips from him that we're going to kind of talk through. And then from that, a good buddy of his, Travis Keith, was probably one of my favorite podcasts that I did this year, just because Travis is one of those guys that I kind of like to refer to as a quiet killer. Very unassuming, just gets the job done, kills big deer, does it often, and just has a really kind of refreshing way as to how he approaches things, and just a really kind of humble way. And he shares, a killer story at the end, which I thought was just an awesome way to kind of wrap this episode up. So with that, this first clip is from our buddy Nathan Killen. I always say his name wrong, so I'm going to apologize. I think it's Nathan Killen, not Keelan, Killen. And really what we're talking about in this particular clip is postseason scouting, kind of perfect for this time of year. And what we started talking about was, how often he goes back and kind of maybe revisits new areas that he's scouted in the past to kind of reevaluate, or how often is he kind of looking at new ground and kind of expanding his horizon, so to speak. And then we get into this kind of topic around finding something, or finding nothing, I guess is the way we say it. Finding nothing is as good as finding something, meaning that sometimes not finding the sign or the information you're looking for is just as good as finding it, because it allows you to kind of remove some of those areas from your potential setups, or tightens an area where a deer could be spending time. So that's what we talk about in this clip. So let's get to it. How's your scouting been this year, man? I know you've been out getting after it. I guess, that might be an appropriate place to just kind of start the overall kind of deer conversation, just kind of curious, what your process is for kind of, dissecting the big woods, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, I know you do a lot of shed hunting, are you kind of, picking out certain areas? Are you trekking to new areas? Are you kind of going back to maybe familiar pieces and kind of seeing what sign has been laid down and maybe what has changed since maybe the last time you hunted it? I guess just talk to me about your overall kind of approach to prep for an upcoming season.
Well, I always re-scout areas that I hunted the previous year, especially, if there was bucks that I was hunting and I know that they made it through season. Of course, I'm going to go in and try to locate their sheds, and also, dig into areas that I wouldn't go into, during hunting season, places that I've kind of put off limits. And, so this time of year, I'm able to go in there and actually locate, exactly where the deer have been bedding and stuff like that. And also, branch out into new areas. I try to keep, at least 4 or 5 areas, what I might say, scouted up, and ready for hunting season, the following year. That way I always have something to fall back on too.
Right.
And of course, they have to have what I'm looking for, in those areas before I would even consider hunting them. But that's part of why we scout.
Yep.
Finding nothing is just as important as finding something. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of shed hunting and just scouting.
Right. All right. This next clip is still yet again from our buddy Nathan Killen, and you kind of heard a little bit about how he scouts, finding sheds, of course, and things of that nature, which are all, shed hunting. Quite truthfully, is something I need to be better at. There's a lot to be gained, of course, by finding sheds as far as where deer are wanting to spend time and maybe, their core area are living. But speaking of the core area and where they're living, and looking for quote unquote beds. That's what this next clip talks about, is when we're talking about the big woods, how are we kind of locating bedding? Where is that bedding located? Are we looking for pockets of deer? How is Nathan kind of going about that process? The one thing that we talk about a little bit in this, and I was really glad that we had a chance to talk about it, or he kind of specifically mentioned it, because when we start talking about bed hunting, a lot of times people think of hunting a specific bed, and some people do that. Greg Litzinger, great example of a guy who will hunt a specific bed. Dan Enfault, great example of someone who will hunt a specific bed. Cody or Andre, hunt a specific bed, right? Jake Bush, hunt a specific bed, right? In some instances, I know Jake will it's always bedding based, but one thing Nathan kind of talks about is that in order to hunt, a buck beds, if you will, you don't have to necessarily be hunting the specific bed that deer might be in, especially when you're in the big woods. It seems like they just aren't quite as consistent as they are maybe, in areas that have more structure. And so it's not so much about hunting a precise bed as it is finding the bedding area in which a particular buck wants to call his home. And he might have multiple beds in there, and that bedding area could be a range of sizes from a very small area to, multiple acres of area. And so that is what we talk about in this clip.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, like two things came to mind as you were kind of mentioning bedding, and you were talking about consistent bedding, and there's, and we might be able to talk about a specific parcel offline that we both have some familiarity with, but like you said, consistent bedding, and I've struggled to, just in all truthfulness, and finding consistent bedding when I'm in the big woods. Like there's certain pieces that I've hunted where, it almost seems like it's random, and I know mature deer don't bed just at random, but man, in some of these places, it just feels like they just got tired and laid down. You know what I mean? Like, and then I have found some worn down beds, but, and I've maybe placed trail cameras like around these and stuff like that to see like when they're being used and how consistently they're being used and stuff like that. But I've almost always felt like those worn beds in the one piece of big woods that it was almost rut bedding, because I could almost always find it in relationship to like a scrape or really close or adjacent to doe bedding or something like that, to where I felt like it was really rut bedding and less like their consistent, fall range bedding prior to rut. Is any of that, do you see any of that, or are you really seeing like consistent bedding where those bucks are using like those same beds over and over and over again?
No, to be honest with you, I find very few beds that I feel like a buck is using consistent enough that that you could catch the right wind direction and have total confidence that you could go in there and at least see him.
Right.
Whenever I'm talking about consistent bedding, I'm talking about
bedding areas
within a
more.
buck's home. Yeah, bedding
Okay.
areas, and this area could be 5 acres, it could be 100 acres, or
Right.
bigger. But now he'll have more than one of those type spots.
Mhm.
Generally, these mountain bucks, that they have almost an oval like home range, and it may take them a day or two or longer to make that circuit,
Mhm.
and it depends on a lot of variables too, like early October, once the white oaks or the acorns are starting to hit the ground, I think that bucks' core areas shrink down extremely small, and I think that's one reason that during that time period it is so hard to get their pictures.
Right.
Here all through the summer, you've been getting their pictures, and then all of a sudden velvet shed and they disappear. Well, it just so happens that not too far after that you start having acorns and stuff dropping. So these bucks, they really shrink down their core area small, and you stop getting pictures of them. You move cameras around, they're hard to pick back up, and but I feel like that if you do, then you have found where he's at, but now it's a short window opportunity there,
Right.
because once we start moving closer into November, you know how those bucks are. They start,
Yeah.
spreading out, opening up their home range. And so, I think that it's, based on the time of the season, early October, they're going to be in smaller areas. Once they start into November, then they're going to start using more of their home range. And, they may be in bedding this one thicket for a day or two, and then they're gone half a mile away for a few days, just going from Doe family group to Doe family group, because here in the mountains you have pockets of deer. And,
Mhm.
I think that, that he just goes from pocket of deer to pocket of deer. Now, once it gets into December, or, well, I'm going to say around the first of the year, then these bucks, that they start really focusing on food heavily, and they're traveling very short distances, and then that's whenever I start seeing the really wore out beds, because
Okay.
that they're not going very far, and they're coming, they found a food source,
They want to
and
bed
they're
close
not
to that
going very
food source
far.
to kind of reserve
That's right.
calories, right? They don't want to move as they want to move
Yeah.
as little as possible, right? Yeah.
That's right. And even though these bucks have really large home or bedding areas within their home range, I think that you know uh, because they're a solitary animal, their bedding is more precision than say a doe would be.
Right.
So they're going to be most likely bedded on a point, or something like that. Whereas a doe, family group, they're going to be, they could be bedded on a flat and the wide open woods.
Mhm.
So just because it sounds like their um, bedding areas are very random and big, they're very strategic within those places where they'll bed.
All right, this next clip again, it's Nate that I did I think 2 episodes with Nathan, and they were just chocked full of information. So if you want to get the full dealio, just go to the website or to whatever app you use and just look for those episodes, because they were just full of really killer information, which is why we have multiple clips from Nathan. This next one again is with Nathan, and this is something I think that as people evolve as bow hunters, you start to get more in tune with. I think early maybe in your hunting career, you find the area where a buck is living, or a deer that you're trying to kill, or just deer in general. Maybe might be one way to frame it. But the guys that have high level success often are able to kind of really fine tune and find the spot within the spot. So they will be able to find the precise tree that is going to give them an opportunity within the spot that they're hunting. They're not just picking a random tree, and it's not by coincidence. It's very, very kind of calculated. So that's the one thing we talk about. The other thing we talk about, and this is hard to do, I think it's easy to talk about, maybe a little harder to do in the moment. And that is, the more and more I talk to these guys who I consider to be high level, very efficient killers, there's something that starts to kind of ring true with a lot of these guys, that oftentimes, not all the time, but a large percentage of the time, they're hunting off the big sign that they find. So they aren't necessarily hunting over that big rub that they found. They're not necessarily hunting over that, monster scrape that they found. Knowing that mature animals maybe behave a little bit differently than the rest of the herd, they're trying to figure out, again, what is the spot within the spot that might be off that big sign, but is going to put you in the right place to have an encounter and potentially put an arrow in the deer that you're trying to hunt. That's what we talk about in this clip.
I want to shift gears here a minute, and I want to start talking about your setups and like how you're kind of picking where you're going to set up, because I think for some people out there listening, like when they're hearing us talking about not setting up on the hot sign, I think all the conventional wisdom, probably what they've read in media, what they've watched in media and stuff like that, is you set up on the sign, right? And here we are talking about, trying to find like the outskirts of that sign and where you can, possibly intercept. So I guess talk to me about how you're kind of, what your setups will typically look like, like how you're picking your tree, and, are you looking for, especially in like the mountain kind of areas, are you looking for certain like multiple terrain features to kind of all come together at a certain spot that makes you feel really good about being just off that big sign or whatever the case is? I guess just talk to me about how you're kind of picking those spots within the spot.
Well, you said it best right there. Multiple terrain features or habitat edges. That the more of those type of spots that you come in to have coming into one place, the better, of course, because you're going to, that just every terrain feature that you have multiplies your chances of a good deer coming through there.
Mm-hmm.
And in places like that, bucks are more likely to come through, but like just single, like a saddle or a bench or something other like that, single type terrain features, bucks tend to skirt around the outer edge of it.
Yep.
I really like hunting secondary ridges. I spend most of my time hunting secondary ridges, but I don't hunt right on top of the ridge. I'm almost always off one side or the other. And generally I'm, on the leeward side.
Yep.
And that kind of accomplishes two things there. That puts you downwind, and just so happens that puts the buck downwind of the same area that you're hunting. So if you play in the wind, then you're most likely putting yourself in position for an encounter with the buck anyway.
Right.
But I was kind of looking at my Onyx the other day, because I'm all the time getting people send me topo maps, asking me to kind of help them, decide on places, and the most obvious places, that you are going to be, saddles or any terrain feature that pops out on, your Onyx or topo map. But I have found that most of my spots are not in those spots. They're more in the micro terrain features, that you can't see on a topo map, or satellite imagery, in the mountains, that is,
right.
Especially whenever it comes to satellite imagery. But, I'm just always off to one side or the other of any terrain feature, or, I'm down under the top of the ridge, along the edge of a, if it's rhododendron, I'm usually, hunting the edge of that. If it's mountain laurel, I'm usually back in it, a little ways. So, there's not really a specific thing that I say that I focus on, other than, if it's a bench, I'm going to be either below the bench or above the bench. I'm not going to be hunting right on the bench.
Right.
On either end of that bench is usually good, because, everything kind of converges, even though a buck, most of the time they'll go around below the lip of the bench, but by the time they get out toward the end of it, the trail that goes across the bench, as well as his trail, is going to be at the closest point.
Right.
At the, so that's how I go about, deciding on where I want to hunt. And of course, it surprises me how many people go up a electric pole straight tree, with no cover on it.
Yep.
And you'll have two guys up those, one a cameraman and one's the hunter, and they stick out like a sore thumb. So, I'm always looking for trees that give me plenty of cover. I think that's where a lot of hunters fail. They just don't choose a tree that gives them sufficient cover.
All right, this next clip is the fourth and final. I think it's the fourth, but it's the final clip with our buddy Nathan Killen. And what we're talking about in this clip particularly is, throughout this podcast that we did together, he had mentioned a couple different times secondary ridges and like certain terrain features or topography features, if you will. And that's something that maybe not everybody really kind of knows about is, those secondary ridges. So you have a ridge that might run, let's just say north and south, for example. And then in the secondary ridges that come off it are those small ridges that kind of jut off to the east or west, right? Those are often really good times or really good places to kind of find, to find buck bedding. Those are kind of places that if you see them on a map, they're all, oftentimes worth, looking into to try to locate some bedding. Of course, there's got to be a couple other things that might be in play, habitat, the right amount of cover and stuff like that. But at least on a map from a topo perspective, those things kind of stand out and are worth potentially investigating. The other thing he talked about that I found really, really interesting is the eastern end of a main ridge, which I thought was really kind of cool. Like he seems to kind of have found some consistency in finding, bucks bedded on the eastern ends of these, main ridges. So we're no longer talking about the secondary ridges. We're talking about a main ridge. It's going to run east to west. That eastern side of it, he really particularly likes. A lot of the reason why is because, and again, this would play into your secondary ridges too, is thinking about what your prevailing wind is, where the sun rises first, especially if it's cold. It's going to be, it rises in the east, so that side of the ridge is going to heat up first. And we talk about all this secondary ridges and eastern end of a main ridge in this clip. I want to go back to, you've mentioned secondary ridges a couple of times, and I would love for everyone out there listening to kind of describe what you mean by that. And if maybe describe what it looks like on a topo map so people will understand, like when they're looking for a secondary ridge, what it is they're looking, that's going to potentially stick out to them.
Well, you have a main ridge that will run a long distance. In my area, most of our ridges run east to west. Mm-hmm. And, that will be a major ridge. And then off both sides of those major ridges, you'll have these little finger ridges that come off, ever so often. And you'll have these drainages, of course, in between each one of those ridges. Mm-hmm. And that's the type of areas that I focus on is those secondary ridges.
Yeah.
And, another great area that I like to, and generally, most of the secondary ridges that I'm hunting are on the eastern end of those main ridges because now I found a lot of big deer love to bed on the very end of those main ridges on the eastern facing slope there. You've got a lot of things working, or they have a lot of things working for them then. Most of our wind comes out of the west, so they've got that westerly wind coming across the top. Yep. The sun rises in the east, and that is the very first surface of the earth that the sun is, starting to hit. So you start not only is it, on really cold days, that's the first warm place that they're going to get, but that's the first place that you're going to get any thermal activity, as far as thermals rising,
Yep.
So those are, good spots to look for. Now, I can't guarantee that you'll always find a big deer there, but that's a good place to look,
So the eastern end of a ridge on a secondary ridge is the spot, is what it sounds like, or at least a good place to start.
On secondary ridges, yes, the eastern face is good, but I'm talking about the very end of a main ridge where it drops off.
Okay. All right, that is it for Nathan. The next series of clips we're going to have come up is with our buddy Eddie Claypool. One of my favorite podcasts from this past year. Eddie is just maybe the OG. I'm not even going to say maybe. He is the OG of like the DIY traveling bow hunter. He's been doing it for forever. Has a ton of big animals, everything from elk to whitetails, like you name it. He's killed it with a bow. And is just a no BS guy. And he knew from an early age what his passion was, and he kind of built his life around the idea of being able to spend as much time with the bow in his hands and in the woods as he possibly could. Basically all fall from, September through the end of November, essentially. In this clip, initial clip here with Eddie is really kind of him talking about how he built that purpose-built life to do what he was passionate about.
I think that's the one thing that I've appreciate, most about your story and how you've kind of come to be, who you are and who people, how people know you is the fact that it was self-made and it is DIY and it's, it's hunts that anybody can go do, and that's the part. And that's the part that I love about it. And that's kind of what, inspired me to really start doing more traveling and hunting different places. And, it helps me, that experience of hunting different places. I try to go somewhere new every year. And a lot of times I don't even get a chance to scout it. I just show up and hunt it, for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And it helps make me a better hunter, I feel, because I'm having to always process things that I'm seeing on the fly, Yeah. Now, granted, I would love to have some time to scout. A lot of times it'd be helpful for sure. It's I'll take what I can get because I'm chasing experiences. Exactly. That's what I'm doing is chasing experiences. But the one thing I want to kind of circle back to here is, you mentioned lifestyle at one point, and I think that that's one of the interesting things where it's like you prioritized hunting as one of the things in your life that you wanted to do, above a lot of other things. And I've heard you kind of talk about it before, you really kind of built your life around to be able to hunt as much as you want to. Like you had a purpose-built life that would allow you to do the things you want to do. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you set that up or how you kind of accomplished that?
I don't know where I fit into this category of humanity and normal, especially, but I just know my experience. And from the moment I went out there and did that, I had a passion that I don't even know how to explain it. It was going to happen one way or the other. And so I just immediately started improvising every day of my life for the next quite a few years to get things. I mean, at age 20, you're just married with children, you're just getting going, and there's so many things to juggle. But I always kept the vision, basically, of the beginning of elk season in Colorado in my mind, and I worked toward that all year. I rat-holed money. I worked extra jobs. If I needed a pair of shoes, I'd go haul hay a day and get the money and buy them. If I needed a backpacking one-man tent, man, I remember the days when something like that was a year-long process for me to be able to get it, to purchase it. It was a major drain on the family if I took $100 bill and did something. We were living from Friday to Friday paychecks,
Yeah.
And I always tried to be a good family man, but I don't know if I was or not. Many people said I was not. Many people said I was. We all know how that goes with life. You're going to have your haters and you're going to have the people that see the reality. I spent a lot of time with my family. I took them up there with me unbelievable amounts of time and introduced them to all that stuff. Some liked, some didn't, but I just had a way of working all year and working extra and figuring out how to manage my occupation to where I would be on jobs that would be working maybe 7 days a week, sometimes for a month or two, for 12 hours a day. And I would pay my house payment 2 months ahead of time so that I didn't have to make a house payment for the month of September and November. I often run right straight home from a hunt in Colorado that would be 5 weeks long, get home, and the next day be back on a 7-day-a-week, 12-hour-a-day job, work it till November 1, get amazingly laid off, and then be off all the month of November to hunt. So, it was just a matter of scrapping in every direction I could to keep the ball rolling, called, married with children, and yet being able to supply. Since I've been about 20, the past 40-some years, I have only worked a job one fall, autumn in my entire life.
Wow. That's pretty good.
I literally worked, August through December 1 year. I've never worked August through December other than that 1 year in 40-some years. So how many people can do that? Not very many, if any.
Yeah.
It takes, it's really the life of a single young man If you're going to do it, you need to get out of high school, go tackle it, learn it, do it, and then maybe get married later in life. And when you're ready, you've got a lot of that out of your system, maybe. Does that make sense?
All right. These next two clips, we're going to smash two together here. I'll just kind of set both of them up at the same time because they're actually kind of related. So the first clip you'll hear with Eddie here coming up is really kind of talking about the watershed moment for him whenever deer hunting really kind of made sense to him, I guess is one way to put it. Eddie admits, he figured out elk, I believe, before he really felt like he figured out whitetails. And it wasn't until at one point that he got the opportunity to basically kind of chase them all fall. Every day he hunted them. And, and what he'll talk about here is really him learning intimately about how they lived through, the months of October and November, and really observing that during that period was really kind of the watershed moment for him that put a lot of things into perspective. And once that happened, the switch kind of flipped and he was then able to really start to capitalize on, more mature deer and just started slaying really, really good deer, essentially. The second clip that you'll hear from Eddie in this little series here of clips that's coming up is, him talking about really examples of what he looks for that is out of the ordinary to find mature bucks. One of the things that kind of stuck with me whenever I got to talk to Eddie during this podcast was you have to think different to kill big deer. They're not typically going to be, or mature deer, I should say. They're not typically going to be in the places where you find other deer, like the true kind of monarchs. They're going to want, like their personalities are just different, and what he talks about in this clip is, what he looks for whenever he's trying to find that out of the ordinary spot. And during the course of the podcast, we talked a lot about, hunting in like blue stem because he hunts a lot, for whitetails, at least in Oklahoma and Kansas. Earlier on, I think he did a lot of hunting in Colorado for whitetails. I think it was Eastern Colorado. But, from going out to the Plain States and hunting this year, I could see what he was talking about. Like it made sense because you would find deer out there when you were glassing and what you felt like was a really, really random out of the way place that you wouldn't think there would be any deer. But that, of course, is where a giant would be, right? Chad, of course, while we were out there, that kind of played out. It was an area where he thought that, had really good deer sign, but there was a ton of people sign, ton of pressure sign in there. And, he ended up finding a bed and it was in an area that was kind of like, that's interesting that this bed is here, and ended up killing a Boone and Crockett deer. So these next two clips are with Eddie. I hope you dig them.
What was, what was you mentioned, elk was something that you just like, it just clicked and made sense. What about, what was the thing for whitetails? Like, I guess, give me a sense of, do you remember a specific kind of watershed moment for whitetail hunting where, where things just all of a sudden clicked and made sense and it was like, okay, I got it. I understand it now.
It was a watershed season. It was a 3-month grind. It was 1988, and I had been at it, progressing a little bit more each year. I was still in the infancy stages. I'd killed deer, nothing real big, but I finally got access to a quality piece of property here in my home state that was big enough for me to go in there and just hunt them all day long, every single day, and not have to worry about them being run amok. I became a deer observer, and I went in there and I hunted between October 1 and December 31, which was our bow season. Mm-hmm. I hunted every day out of those 3 months except 3. 3 days out of those 3 months, I was not there. And out of the days I was there, 60 some of them, I was there from daylight to dark. Okay. I got through that year with deer on the brain. I watched deer do everything deer do. I learned more about whitetail deer in that season, in those thousands of hours I set out there, I just had a massive cram course on their behavior and how they function. And I just come to some realizations that season of what had to be done, through the different stages of October, November, and December, how they lived their life, how they utilized their habitat, how their behavioral characteristics, everything from does to button bucks to 2.5-year-old bucks to the big mature bucks. I mean, I watched them, I learned them. And after that season, then I fell into it like, a duck in water. I just, then all I had to do was start branching out and going to where I could hunt big deer then.
Right.
And, I started going out of state. Back in that day, I had about a 3 or 4 year run in eastern Colorado that was incredible. I went out there. That was one of the first places I traveled to back in the late 80s, was in eastern Colorado. I was driving through it every year to go up there and go hunting, and I had become aware there were whitetails in eastern Colorado. I went out there, and for 3 or 4 years, I had seasons that would rival anything anybody could do with money. I mean, I was seeing 1 to 4 Boone and Crockett plus bucks every year.
Like, is there one thing that you could point to that was the hardest thing for you to learn about whitetails that let you start to get consistent on them? Because for me, I'll give you a for example. For me, things started making a lot more sense to me once I was able to stop thinking about what my wind and thermals were going to do, that I could just get to a spot and I could understand what my prevailing was and what the thermals were going to do as the day changed, whether it was morning into, afternoon or afternoon into evening. Once I understood how to give the deer the wind and I understood what my thermals were going to do and how to play those, everything started making a lot more sense for me. It became not easy, I don't want to say, but I knew how to hunt areas when I got to them. I didn't have to think about it anymore. Is there anything like that for you that was more challenging to pick up and learn, that once you kind of got it, it was kind of the nail in the coffin, so to speak?
Well, I'm sure, and I think back about picking up, I learned so much about the thermal and all. I was
just going to say, elk hunting,
Yeah, out west, you absolutely live and die by thermals out west in the mountains. So I already had that down before I got good at whitetail. The thing that really, and I'm weird here because I'm not saying that what I did for all these years on whitetails was the best approach to kill the biggest bucks, but it was what I fell into. It's what I did, and it's feathered my nest well. I haven't killed 200-inch deer. I've killed absolute dump truck load of bucks and lots of my best bucks are up in the upper 180s. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But what I learned was this: how to hunt them during the peak of the rut. I knew that I was probably never in my lifetime going to have a place that was unbothered. I was going to either be hunting public land or somewhere that is a freak show. So I was not going to be able to set up these hunts like we see on the TV shows where, you've got this big acreage and you get everything and you can go in there and their pattern. And all. I knew that was never going to be me. So I decided I was going to have to learn to hunt them during the only time the big ones are at their weakest moment, during that helter-skelter time when they're breeding and they're out of their mind and they're staggering around doing dumb stuff. So what I learned from watching them way back there, and it took me quite a few years, even after I learned this, to start putting it in practice, because you just can't stick your neck out far enough to go for this, is how those big ones, the ones that you don't rarely ever see, you don't even know they're around, the vapors, those giants, how that every time after year they showed up, it was always in the most off-the-wall place and off-the-wall time. It's never in the standard place and the standard time. And so when I finally got a grip on that and started going out of the normal on my places and times, I started killing my biggest bucks. Now, it's more like the place you said before, because you're stepping out into a place there where you're not going to see very many deer very often. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
You've got to get away from that willingness to, most everybody wants to hunt where all the hot sign is and where the freak show's going on. Well, that's fine. You're going to have a lot of fun down there and you're probably going to kill 140s. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I killed the bigger ones out in the far reaches of their fringe habitat, out there where nobody hunts, where they actually spend most of their time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, I'm just curious. Can you give me, because I'm trying to envision this. Is there an example, or is there a strategy that you've used? Maybe it's not even that it's been consistent, but it's like maybe there's a strategy that you're remembering that worked. Can you just give me an example of one of these kind of setups? You know, what the scenario was, time of year, things like that, just so I can kind of wrap my head around what you're. Because I totally agree with you, and I've heard this. And I think folks have kind of, you know, have kind of know this in the back of their mind, right? But it's a really, really hard habit to break, to get off all that sign and, you know, and move to an area where you take a look around and you look at it and you say, it doesn't look like a deer would ever live here. But
that's where
right. So give me an example, I guess, of like a hunt where it all played out like that, or like a tactic that you used to get it done.
Well, I'll give you a good one. And this is probably one of the oldest whitetail bucks I've ever killed. He was way past his prime. He was an ancient old monarch, prairie deer out of Kansas. I was hunting in a section, a literal, you know, square mile section of prairie that didn't have 15 acres of cover in the whole square mile. And it was patchy. It was stringer. It was brush. And I had, on the next section over, is a big creek bottom. That's where all the signs at. That's where all the deer were at. You could go down there and just froth at the bit. That's where 99 out of 100 guys wanted to go hunt. Well, I had kind of started seeing and learning, caught some crossing the road at night and different things coming out of that prairie. And I was like, I got to get this going. So I go out there. I took a day and beat that down. And I learned that there were swags, I call them, gentle gullies out in there that you didn't even know were out there, that had little brush patches and different things. And I found one that had about 3 cottonwood trees in it, about 100 yards apart up and down it, wide open country. You could see the horizon for 360 degrees around you, just blue stem prairie. And in there, in that one swag, was a big old honking signpost rub. And I said, okay, that's what I thought. And that's all I need to know. So I put me a stand in this cottonwood, and I'm telling you, if I didn't ever feel like one of the dumbest, I mean, if you saw where this was at, you would have a problem believing it. I mean, it's unbelievable. You wouldn't think whitetail deer were even out there. And there weren't hardly any out there, and there weren't really very many does at all around anywhere, bucks either. It was just this one great big one. And I knew he was there because his rub's right here in front of me. I sat there for 3 days, from dark in the morning till dark in the evening, and I caught glimpses of 3 or 4 different deer at a distance during that time. And I was just about at my wit's end. Every day I was getting more convinced I was a Looney Tune. And it was November the 18th. I'll not forget it. The 4th day I sat there was my birthday, November the 18th. So it's right in the middle of breeding season. And since then, I've kind of learned, you may have heard of breeding hideouts, breeding sanctuaries. Yep. Well, I was evidently in that big buck's little hidey hole out there in the prairie. And sure enough, right at dusk on that 4th day, and I really believe it's going to be my last day sitting out there. I don't think I could have took it any longer. Right in the evening, I seen a doe coming across the prairie, and then right behind her was that giant. They come over that prairie for a mile and come over in there and dropped into that little swag I was in, and he ended up right at the end of shooting light where I could shoot him and kill him. And he was as old as any whitetail buck can get and live in the wild. He had virtually no teeth left in his head. He was just an ancient, monstrous old monarch. Now, his antlers probably had been bigger at some point in his life, you know, but he still grossed around 170 as an old downhill buck. Right. And, you know, I just went out there and put in the dues that, you know, I don't think very many guys would enjoy that hunt at all. And I don't advise them to do it because it's not fun. It's mentally draining. But boy, I mean, if you're after just a big one, what I've learned in the open country is get out there in the fringe stuff. I mean, when I used to hunt the Flint Hills area, which I just finally actually this year got me a piece of land finally, first piece I've ever owned in my life. And I bought it up there in the prairie of Kansas. And I can go down to my big creek bottom and it's just lined with scrapes and rubs and all the deer and the sign, and you just have a ball down there hunting. And pretty soon you've run them all off. You're hunting right in their living room. And I don't even go down there much anymore. I just set out on I call it the spokes of the Ferris wheel. I set out on the far spokes and I let them come to me. I leave them alone in their core areas and don't educate them and don't relocate them. And I let my local deer be local deer. I don't move them. And then sure enough, during that peak time in November, if I sit there and put my dues in, some big old gomer is going to come staggering across the prairie and walk down my fence line. Because I sit out in hedgerows and fence lines that people don't even look at when they drive by.
All right. This next clip is with our buddy Travis Keith, who Eddie Claypool turned me on to. He is someone who Eddie thinks is just one of the best hunters that he knows, which is high praise coming from a guy like Eddie Claypool. And honestly, it's well-placed praise. I had a chance to obviously have Travis on the podcast, but have also kind of struck up just a long distance kind of friendship with him where we text a lot, communicate with each other a lot back and forth. And he had a really good year this year. So I'm hoping that I'm able to get him back on the show here, maybe this spring to kind of talk about the year that he had. But what we talk about in this first clip with Travis is how he scouts and what he's using for access. If you listen to the entire podcast, it's really kind of, what I would classify it as is Travis's approach is really a meat and potatoes approach. He's looking for topography features, and he's hunting during prime times where deer are going to be move most often and provide, the most, I guess, target rich opportunities essentially. But what he does really, really well, aside from just like his scouting and just like he has a knack for being in the right spot, but it's because he spends a lot of time scouting with boots on the ground, and he trusts his eyes, he trusts his instincts, and he trusts that whenever he's at a spot and he feels like it's the right spot, that he's willing to kind of put the time in and hunt that spot. But the thing that he's super diligent about is his access. And he's oftentimes looking for some type of water access. And in this clip, he talks about his scouting approach to finding a new piece. And then the access in this one, what he has to go through is probably more than a lot of folks would want to go through in order to access a piece to hunt, which is exactly why he had the result that he had on this particular piece.
What's your typical scouting process look like out there? Let's say it's a brand new piece to you that you've never hunted before, a piece of public or walk-in access or, whatever the case is. Where are you starting? Because for me, when I look at it, whether it's Pennsylvania, Ohio, even when I was in Missouri or Iowa or whatever, the terrain's a little bit different, but I'm still going to have elevation changes. I'm still going to have significant blocks of timber and things like that to where I have some familiarity with those things from living in Pennsylvania. So it translates. But for me, heading to somewhere like Kansas or Oklahoma, where the terrain is just so vastly different from what I'm used to, I'm just curious, for you, when you see a new piece and you're going to hunt this new piece of public you've never seen before, where are you starting? Are you starting online and kind of going from there? Or are you going straight boots on the ground?
I'll spend a lot of time, on Google Earth, and I'll look at different places, and I'll look at them a bunch of different times, throughout the year sometimes, because it's funny. Like I'll look at something on Google Earth, and then I'll go walk it out. And then I'll come back and look at it on Google Earth again, and then it makes better sense. And then, I may go walk it out again and look at it again on Google Earth. And sometimes, like, it could be a year later, I'll pull up Google Earth and look at the same place, but I may think of something just a little differently. But and a light bulb goes off, and it's like, oh, I need to try that, But a lot of times I'm trying to think where people aren't going to try to be, and that's hard. That's the hardest thing for me to figure is where somebody else doesn't want to go. Because, if you pick a good looking spot, there's usually somebody else that did too, So,
yeah.
But if it's a new place, I got to look at my access. Where can I come and go from this spot? And then, if there's a particular piece that seems appealing, if I walk it out and, I'm like, man, that's a no brainer right there. I gotta be able to get there. And then look at where I have to come from. Can I get to it safely?
Mm-hmm.
For me, like, can't stress enough the access coming and going is, without something knowing you're doing it is as important as anything else.
Yeah.
If
Is
they know you're coming, it's game over, really.
right.
You don't really have a chance before you start, unless you just get, the dumb rutting buck that comes by, which can happen,
Yeah, or you just get super lucky.
Oh yeah, and that stuff happens. I mean,
yeah,
you have to for that stuff. You just have to be present,
mm-hmm.
and good stuff happens. Like, but you got to be there for it to happen. So.
Yeah. What so I'm imagining with as flat as I'm imagining it's flat. So I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's super flat, and not a lot of topo to kind of hide behind. So when you're talking about access, like I can envision myself, and this is just again a guy coming from a flatlander or a guy coming from Pennsylvania, right? Going to come to
mm-hmm.
the plain states to hunt. I'm thinking about my access, and that's one thing that I've thought about. And here I'll use whether it's terrain to kind of hide behind. I can envision making sure my wind is correct for access in the plains. I get
mm-hmm.
it, but the part that I struggle with a little bit is how am I hiding? Like, how am I hiding myself? How am I not being skylit? How am I not, kind of out in the wide open, because there's not a whole lot to hide behind. So how do you, give me walk me through what you would do to access a property. Like, what's a crazy thing you might do? Are you like going to a creek bottom and just walking the creek bottom up to be hidden? But what's your approach for that?
If I can come up with a plan where I feel like I am safe, I don't care what I have to do. If I have to go out of my way to do it, like,
Mm-hmm.
I will do that. If I think this, if me cutting across here is wrong because like the wind's wrong or something, if I have to go way out of my way, I will, just because that's probably one of the most important things for me. This is an example of one stand that I've hunted for 2 years. It's on public. It's on a little river. I can easily walk up to this stand from where I park. It's easier to walk up there. But if I were to do that, everything would know I'm coming, and I just feel, that isn't going to work. I could kill something, but not, I'm going to alert a lot of animals when I walk in there. So there's a river thing, and I'll put in my canoe, and I got a paddle. It's like 3/4 of a mile up this river, completely like going the wrong direction because there's a big oxbow that goes way out and around.
That's always fun too, going the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah, you go in the other direction, that's okay. But once I get to the end of this oxbow, there's like a massive log jam that's like too big to cross. Like it's 100-yard log jam.
Mm-hmm.
So before season starts, I have to hide another kayak or canoe on the other side of this log jam. So, and I leave it there all season for the time I'm hunting, just way back off in the woods on the side of this creek or whatever. And so, before the dark of the morning, I get up and I paddle about 3/4 of a mile to the log jam. Have to get out, walk over this little bit of the point of the oxbow, and then get back in this other little boat that I stashed, and then paddle another little, quarter to half up to my tree stand or whatever. I could easily walk up there. It's much easier, but I can do that. I take one boat, get in the other boat, and then paddle up there and climb out of the bank and climb up my tree, and nothing really knows I came or went. I can sit there all day, and then get back in my boat and float out of there. And I don't feel like I damaged the place if I got to sit there again all day tomorrow or the third day.
Yeah. That water access that's pretty slick, man. How far is your setup from getting out of that second boat, would you say?
They're normally like really close to the creek. Like
mm-hmm.
that creek's probably like 10 yards off the bank,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to just appear. If I had one magical power, it would be just to teleport.
Right. Yeah.
But and a lot of my setups are via canoe or kayak, and it has dealing with either going up creeks or rivers or crossing them or coves, and with the wind in my favor. And that way, I feel like typically I'm like 100% safe. If I have a westerly wind and I'm cutting across a body of water and hit that bank and get out and get in a tree, and my wind is blowing back across the water most of the time. Like most of the time, I don't ever bump anything.
Right.
Sometimes there's stuff that may be there when you get there, but
right,
like that's not too big of a deal.
Yeah, and I would imagine sitting that close to the water too, you probably get a nice little thermal pool into that river.
Yeah.
Whatever that bottle of water is, just kind of suck it right back down the river. I'd imagine, especially sitting that close on it.
I mean, that's a lot of what I look for. I mean, currently it's just different places that probably have water in the way. Really, like a long time ago, I kind of, I watched Eddie do some hunting and picked up on a couple things and decided I needed to, be able to try to get to where some other people weren't going to get. And, I figured a certain amount of people have a boat or a canoe or something. And a certain amount of those people are actually going to get up in the dark in November and go use it, and that's a few amount of people. But
all right, this next clip is our final clip of this episode, and it's again with our buddy Travis Keith. He hails, of course, from Oklahoma. And I just thought that this clip was the perfect way to end this session. As I'd mentioned, Travis is one of my favorite people that I've talked to, one of my favorite people that I've had the opportunity to meet through this podcast. And what we talk about on this clip is there's nothing really strategy related in this. So you might be asking, a lot of what I talk about is strategy and DIY hunting. So why am I adding something in that's not particularly strategy or tactic related? It's because sometimes hunting means a little bit more than filling the tag or the success that you're having, or it means way more than strategy or the tactic. And that's exactly what this clip talks about. He had two different recoveries on deer that, I think he would agree. He probably, felt like he made decent shots, but they maybe weren't as good as he thought they were, or that he had hoped they were. And had a long, hard kind of trying to find these deer, after he shot them and made bad shots, and what that does to you and kind of how you feel about it. But what you will learn through this clip, and the thing that I think that I appreciate the most about Travis, aside from that he's a really good hunter, is that his moral fiber and his deep faith, I think, are the two things from this clip that whenever he told me this story, I kind of walked away thinking that, man, this guy's got his priorities in order. Like his mindset is right. And then when you know that at the end of listening to the podcast with him, it's not a surprise as to why he has the type of success that he has. So I'll leave you with this clip.
Well, I mean, I think this is a perfect time. I just have like two more things for you, I think. Being present in the moment and making those memories. So what I wanted to see if you could do is if you would be willing or could share a specific hunt that sticks out to you when you look back, that you really felt that this was a moment where either you learned an important lesson, it helped you become a better hunter, or something or something that might have just been a really cool hunt. Do you have anything like that sticks out to you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll just touch on, last year's season. I killed a couple, nice deer. I'd hunted in Oklahoma, out of that southwind stand I was talking about, and ended up shooting a good deer. What I thought to be in the liver, it was back and it was low, and he didn't go very far, and he looked ill. He looked sick, I backed out, and I waited like 6 hours before I came back and me and my brother started looking for him, and we ended up, jumping him up. He didn't go very far, and we ended up jumping him up a second time. And then after that, he made it to this weed field, and I lost him out there. I spent the next 2 days kind of looking for him through that weed field, trying to figure out where he had went, and never really figured that out. So I think by the third day, it was time to go get back in a tree, and I went up to Kansas and shot this other good deer in the exact same place, like in the liver. And he had the exact same reaction. He didn't go very far, and he looked very sick. It was 1 p.m., and so I backed out, and I didn't come back until the next morning. I knew 6 hours obviously wasn't long enough, and I had a good feeling he was going back to his bed, and so I wanted to let him get there, and hopefully he was there the next morning, So I go back the next day, and I make it to that bed. He's not in it. I do see a drop of dried blood, and I see a drop of semi-dried blood, which led me to believe he was there that morning, and he got up and walked out when he saw me walking in. And so I walked up, to the top of this ridge and looked around a little bit where I thought just on a whim where I thought he might go through some thickets or whatnot, and I didn't see him. So long story short, I walked like 5 miles looking around this weed field and thorn field, just randomly searching. And I found his second bed, which was maybe 100 yards from his first bed, and there was a drop of blood in it. I'd go back to this point, and then I would, I'd venture off and go search, and then come back to this and regroup and just kind of search this whole area. And at the end of the day, it was getting 3 o'clock or so. I had about one more good long search before sunset, and throughout the day, I never really got like discouraged and down. It's real easy to get discouraged and give up, and think what you're seeing is terrible. Like there was very little blood, and then you call your buddies and you're like, well, I did this, he acted like this, this is what I'm seeing. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't sound too good, man. And it's discouraging. But in the back of my mind, I always just kind of felt like I wasn't going to give up. And throughout that day of walking through all the thorns, I was just kind of like, Lord, just kind of guide my feet, just help me with my decision making here and there, and just take me where I need to go. And so I was laying in his bed, kind of just relaxing, figuring out what I needed to do. And I was like, I need to go one more good walk. And I stood up, and about 20 yards away, there's a doe standing there, and she's like 10 yards off of this trail that I've already walked down. There's a deer trail, and then she's just off of it a little bit, and she's 20 yards from me. And I kneel down, and she kind of eventually gets nervous and leaves. And I was like, well, I wonder what she was standing by. And I was like, I'm going to walk over there. And I walk over there, and there's this deer laying there. And he's dead. And he's 25 yards from where I've been looking all day long, Like I walked 5 miles around him, and he's 25 yards from where I've been laying, looking. And it was just like, I broke down in tears, because it was just like the satisfaction of not really giving up, and knowing that he kept a good attitude, and it was just kind of a test of like
of will,
not giving up, not getting discouraged, not getting down at the mouth, not being like, dang it, and just kind of going and going and going. And then it was like he was like, you've been good, like, here you go.
Right.
You can have him back. Like you're gonna hang on to this guy, and you're gonna be a good steward to him. Like, yeah, you can have him back. Yeah. And man, I was so grateful.
Yeah.
And so I brought him home and dealt with him, and then ran right back up to the deer camp or whatever, and was gonna get back in the stand, and the next day I was gonna go get in that southwind stand where I wounded that first deer, and hunt a little bit, and then get down and go look for him. And about time it's time to get down, and my brother was supposed to meet me and all this stuff, and I didn't want to bother his hunt. And I was like, don't worry about it today. We'll do it tomorrow. Like, I'm gonna go take this tree stand down. That's, it's about a mile up the river or whatever. And so I walked up the river in the middle of the day and like took my, I didn't walk, I paddled actually,
Right.
but took my canoe up the river or whatever, and took my stand down, and that was kind of the end of the day. I may have hunted that evening, whatever. So the next day comes, and I'm going to same game plan. I'm going to sit, and then we're both going to go look for this deer. We're going to beat this weed field down. He's got to be out there somewhere. And just as a reference from where I shot the deer, let's just say he ran 400 yards south, Right. And so this tree stand I took down was a mile north, so opposite direction. So I get down on that Thursday, and I was like, well, I need to go look for this deer. And then I remembered I'd left like this machete that was laying on the river up there when I took my stand down a mile up the river, like a $20 machete from Academy. But my daughter had got it for me for Father's Day, like 5 years ago or something,
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, my daughter's name is Easton, so she got named after the arrows a long time ago.
That's awesome.
But so I was like, oh man, I was like, Easton got me that machete. I need to go get it,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mongoloid of a walk, And
yeah.
So I walk up there and I get my machete, and I'm just kind of walking back. I was like, I'll do a little, November fresh deer scouting, on my way back, like just look at some of this deer sign while I head back down that way to go look for my deer. And I'm going, and I'm about halfway back, so I'm still 500-600 yards north of my stand or whatever, which that deer had ran like 400 or 500 yards south, right? And I'm just in some big, like, tall yellow grass, flooded, stuff, and along the river, and kind of walk off in this little depression, and there was like a couple of cottonwood trees, and I walked up in there, and like I just had this feeling, and I was like, this feels like a good place for something to like lay down and die.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked over, and like at the base of this cottonwood tree I see a deer's rib cage, and I'm like, well, there's a dead deer. And I walk over there, and it's my buck that I had shot 10 days earlier.
Jeez. And
I, for not 10 full days looking, from the day I shot him to 2 days looking to this, I'd been looking, and I had my bow in my hand the whole time,
Right.
And I'd been looking for this deer actively to try to, find them and get them. And then, here I go walking up the river, and I come back, and all I've got is the machete in my hand, and it hit me. And it's like, and again, I never really got down in the mouth about this deal either. I was, bummed about the situation, but I wasn't, I hadn't given up.
Right.
I didn't really expect to find them, but the story wasn't over. I didn't feel like it was over, like he was gone,
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing there, and it was like the same feeling of like, you've been good, and here he is, and like now you have the right tool to remove, basically what you can salvage, because the coyotes had got him, and he was 10 days old, and
Right.
the meat obviously wasn't as good, but I'd been walking around with the bow and arrow looking for him, and I wasn't really going to be able to remove his head with that, but
Mm-hmm.
but if I had not left that machete, on accident the day before,
Would have never made it there.
and if I hadn't decided to walk up there and get it,
Yeah.
just because my daughter bought it for me,
Yeah.
like
Well,
you can't make that stuff up, you know.
Yeah. That I feel like that's her deer though, right?
Do what?
I said I feel like that's her deer then,
yeah.
right?
She gets her own deers for sure. Yeah.
Nice, man.
But I mean, that one was just like, I don't know how to, like, I couldn't make that up,
That's
and
crazy.
certain
man.
little things happen, and it's a gut feeling of, yeah, you should go get that,
Yeah.
And it would be really easy to be like, no, I'm not going to walk up there and get that. I'll just go buy a new one,
Yeah.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there. I'd be super appreciative if you do those few things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.